Stuart had always mocked Janet, laughing cruelly as she moved through the mess hall, serving coffee and straightening files, as if her existence was only there to amuse him. Every smirk, every biting remark, was a calculated jab meant to belittle her, yet Janet never flinched. Behind the calm, deliberate movements of a simple civilian worker hid a lethal secret. She wasn't just organizing papers or refilling coffee pots, she was on a covert mission, her every action measured, every glance calculated, every heartbeat aligned with a purpose Stuart could never suspect. But then Stuart's arrogance went too far. With a sneer and a demand to see her cute little tattoo, he thought he would humiliate her further, confident in his superiority. Janet slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a dark falcon clutching a lightning bolt, the symbol of an elite force few could claim. Stuart froze, color draining from his face, his eyes wide with recognition and fear. That moment shattered the power he believed he held. From that instant, Janet's plan took form, a quiet, meticulous orchestration of vengeance, waiting for the precise moment to strike. What would come next would not just humble Stuart, it would expose a truth he never imagined. But before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's uncover how this story truly began. The fluorescent lights above the mess hall at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado stutter, their flicker rhythmically stabbing at the edges of Lieutenant Stuart's vision. The dull throb behind his temples pulsed in time with the electrical hum, a low-grade percussion that matched the irritation coiling in his chest. He slouched at the officer's only table, elbows resting on the polished laminate, the chair groaning under the weight of arrogance. Every line of his posture screamed entitlement. The trident pin glinting on his chest reflected the harsh, sterile lights as if it were a halo crowning a self-declared deity. His eyes scanned the room lazily, lingering on nothing and everything simultaneously. The way a predator surveys a territory, assumes it owns, Janet moved in contrast. Her steps were soundless across the linoleum, deliberate, measured, almost surgical. At 35, she bore the appearance of unremarkable civility, a generic blue logistics smock, hair tied back with military precision, sleeves pulled down to her wrists, concealing what needed to remain unseen. Her tasks were mundane, repetitive, refilling coffee urns, wiping tabletops, arranging the crumbled remnants of hurried breakfasts, but she executed them with an unspoken discipline that left no trace of hesitation. Each motion carried efficiency honed by years of instinct, muscle memory, and silent calculation. "Hey, you. Lunch lady." The bark cut through the low murmur of the mess hall like a staccato gunshot. Stuart's fingers snapped sharply, slicing the air as if he could command obedience with mere motion. Janet froze mid-step, the rag damp against her palm, a bee of condensation forming at her temple. She turned slowly, deliberately, eyes flat, voice devoid of inflection. "Yes, Lieutenant." No tremor betrayed the calm she projected. The air seemed to congeal around her, a subtle resistance that irritated him further. "My coffee is cold." Stuart's sneer was clinical in its contempt as he poured the lukewarm liquid directly onto the floor near her scuffed sneakers. The splash of brown liquid hissed against the linoleum. "And I'm bored. I've seen you scratching that wrist of yours all week. What are you hiding under that long sleeve? Some boyfriend's name? A butterfly?" A chorus of junior officers erupted in laughter, a cacophony of submission masquerading as amusement. They leaned forward eagerly, eyes flicking between predator and prey, soaking in the unspoken demonstration of dominance. "It's nothing, sir," Janet murmured, her gaze cast downward. Her jaw muscle fluttered, a micro-expression, subtle but precise, a twitch that hinted at something lethal held in restraint. Her shoulders remained square, posture unbroken. "I didn't ask if it was nothing. I gave you a direct order." Stuart rose, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. His frame, 6'2" of conditioned muscle, loomed over her. Each inch he gained in height was intended to compress her space, to assert authority, to intimidate. "Show your precious tattoo. Let's see what kind of trash you ink on yourself." A silence fell, heavy, thickened by the collective inhalation of the room. Eyes tracked Janet as she tilted her head slightly, the faint flex of her neck muscles betraying nothing but awareness. Then, almost imperceptibly, the mask of submission slipped from her expression. Her gaze locked onto Stuart's, cold, surgical, tactical. She measured him not as a superior officer, not as a threat in conventional terms, but as a variable, a target, an anomaly to be processed. Deliberately, Janet's fingers worked the button of her left cuff. Fabric yielded, sliding up past her wrist with the fluidity of a rehearsed maneuver, past her forearm, revealing the canvas beneath. There was no butterfly. There was no romantic script tinked for sentimental display. In deep, faded black, the peregrine falcon clawed a lightning bolt across her inner forearm, wings extended, talons precise, each feather etched with a meticulous eye. Encircling the predator, Latin letters formed a ring, Celeritas ad litem, speed and death. Beneath the talons, a small red numeral gleamed like a warning beacon, understated but undeniable. The room's air contracted in response, oxygen seeming to vanish under the weight of recognition. Stuart's smirk wavered, his pupils dilated, and the subtle blanch of panic crept across his cheeks. Color drained from his face, the truth crystallized in his mind. The woman he dismissed as a civilian contractor was no ordinary presence. He stepped back, an involuntary recoil, the heel of his polished boot skidding slightly in the coffee he had spilled. Janet did not speak, she did not exhale. Every fraction of her posture communicated intent, lethal calm, the patient observation of a hunter watching the moment of realization unfold in the prey. Stuart's cognition raced, understanding the catastrophic error he had made. He had misidentified his target and for a predator, misjudging the hunt could be fatal. The microseconds stretched into eternity, and in them, Janet's silent, unwavering stare spelled inevitability. The mess hall remained suspended in a fragile equilibrium, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as if holding their breath along with the room. 10 seconds stretched into an eternity. Janet's fingers lingered at the edge of her cuff, her movements deliberate, calibrated, a study is silent command. When she finally rolled the sleeve down, the motion was smooth, fluid, mechanical, yet infused with the precision of trained muscle memory. Not a tremor betrayed her. Not a single micro-expression flickered across her face. She picked up the empty coffee pot with a subtle flex of her wrist, its weight absorbed in practiced ease, and carried it into the kitchen, her steps measured, feet gliding over the linoleum with near-surgical efficiency. Stuart remained at the table, the chair groaning under the sudden redistribution of weight as he slumped forward. His hands lay atop the laminate, the knuckles white, trembling imperceptibly. The faint tremor betrayed a cortex firing rapid, anxious circuits, subconscious recognition that the equation had shifted irreversibly. He inhaled through his nose, shallow, uneven, as if each breath were a negotiation with his body to maintain composure. What was that? Stu, an ensign venture, eyes wide with curiosity, voice carrying a tentative edge. It's just a bird. Shut up. Stuart's hiss cut the room again, tight, controlled, a vocalization of barely contained agitation. His jaw clenched until the masseter throbbed visibly beneath the skin, a subtle signal of mounting cortisol levels. That's not just a bird, that's the insignia for Task Force Falcon. Joint Special Operations Command, Tier 1 assets. His gaze darted briefly to the doorway, to the scuffed shoes now absent, then back down at the table, tracing the grain of the laminate as if he could anchor himself to something concrete. So, maybe her husband is in the unit, the ensign offered, shrugging, naive to the intricacies of Tier 1 classification and operational security protocols. Spouses don't get the numeral, Stuart whispered, barely audible, sweat beading at the apex of his upper lip. The flesh glistened in the flickering lights, a physiological symptom of acute sympathetic activation. The numeral means she was an operator, a handler, or something worse. The words left his mouth like a confession he couldn't retract, each syllable dragging him closer to the precipice of comprehension. Meanwhile, in the relative shadow of the back kitchen, Janet exhaled a long, measured breath, the kind that regulated heart rate and maintained oxygen saturation during peak stress scenarios. Her pulse remained steady, unflustered at 65 beats per minute, despite the proximity of a high-value target actively unraveling before her. Fingers briefly adjusted the earpiece hidden beneath her hairline, subtle movement calibrated to avoid detection by peripheral surveillance or reflexive glances. She was no mere support staff, her official cover civilian contractor. Logistics was a facade perfected over years of clandestine operational experience. She was a Master Chief Special Warfare Operator, technically retired, but now reactivated for a black operation under the Office of Naval Intelligence. Her assignment, Operation Glass House, mission parameters dictated discretion, patience, and precise engagement. Intelligence analysis had identified an internal compromise at Coronado. Classified SEAL deployment schedules were being illicitly transmitted to foreign actors. The traitor profile had been narrowed to a mid-level officer exhibiting chronic gambling debts, narcissistic tendencies, and elevated risk for opportunistic betrayal. In operational vernacular, he was both predictable and dangerous, a controllable variable if approached with correct protocol. Target confirmed, she whispered into the concealed microphone. The words were clipped, measured, devoid of emotion yet carrying the weight of verification. Lieutenant Stewart, psychological profile matches. He's reactive, insecure, and panicked. I've rattled the cage. Her eyes scanned the kitchen perimeter, noting each reflective surface, each possible entry point, the subtle variations in lighting. Every sensory input was catalogued, processed, and stored for subsequent action. She allowed herself a microsecond of acknowledgement for the theater unfolding beyond the walls of this kitchen, a predator, unmasked by arrogance, beginning to understand he had misjudged the hunt. Every fiber of Janet's body maintained readiness. Her posture, while relaxed to the untrained eye, was cold. Her breathing remained steady, diaphragmatic, optimizing oxygen flow for rapid deployment if required. Her earpiece transmitted low-level white noise to mask her heartbeat from biometric sensors. Not a single movement betrayed intention, yet every micro-expression in Stewart's periphery, the quick blink, the twitch of a lip, the subtle tightening of his jaw, was a data point she catalogued, storing for operational leverage. The mess hall beyond the kitchen continued in oblivious routine. Junior officers laughed, sipped coffee, riffled through reports, none perceiving the microsecond by microsecond calculus that had just taken place. Janet's presence remained innocuous to them, yet in that silence, power had shifted, and a predator had glimpsed the shadow of a far more lethal force. Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado underwent a subtle but unmistakable shift. Nothing official changed, no alerts, no lockdowns, no briefings, but something moved beneath the surface, like a pressure front rolling in unseen. Lieutenant Stewart felt it first. It settled into him, heavy and invasive, a presence that followed him from corridor to corridor, office to office, refusing to loosen its grip. He became fixated. Each night, long after most of the administrative staff had cleared out, Stewart remained in his office, bathed in the cold, blue glow of his monitors. The ambient hum of servers vibrated faintly through the walls, a mechanical pulse that matched the restless tapping of his fingers on the desk. His eyes burned from staring to lawn at encrypted directories and personnel databases. He entered Janet's employee identification number with deliberate care, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. The response came instantly: access denied, security clearance level, Yankee white required. His pupils constricted. The muscle beneath his left eye twitched once, then again. Impossible, he muttered, voice hoarse, the word scraping out of him as his fist slammed into the desk. The impact rattled the framed commendation on the wall. She wipes tables. The rationalization sounded hollow even to him. Sleep abandoned him. When he did rest, it came in fragments, brief, shallow intervals punctuated by the image of the falcon, the numeral, the way her eyes had lifted to meet his without fear. During daylight hours, his obsession sharpened into surveillance. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the administrative courtyard, Stewart leaned against the railing, pretending to scroll through his phone while his gaze tracked Janet below. She carried boxes of printer paper into the admin building, her posture slightly slouched, her gait deliberately unremarkable. Her shoulders rounded forward just enough to suggest fatigue. Her steps were uneven, almost careless, the feet of someone unconcerned with situational awareness. He searched her relentlessly, a limp, a scar at the neck. An unconscious habit, checking corners, scanning reflections, favoring cover. There was nothing. She shuffled when she walked. She paused to adjust her grip when the box shifted. Once, she stopped entirely, resting the load against her hip as if her lower back ached. To any observer, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a civilian woman in her mid-30s, worn down by routine, focused on nothing more than finishing her shift and going home. The absence of evidence unsettled him more than proof ever could. Then the anomalies began. On the fourth morning, Stewart went to the range, driven by the need to reclaim control. The smell of burnt powder and solvent grounded him as he set his target at 300 yards. He focused on breathing, on fundamental sight alignment, Trigger squeeze. Follow through. His shots were clean, the grouping tight. Familiar pride stirred briefly in his chest. When he walked downrange to retrieve the target, that pride evaporated. At the exact center of the cranial scoring zone, adhered cleanly to the paper, was a small sticker, a smiley face. His throat constricted. He scanned the perimeter, turning slowly, pulse hammering behind his ears. The range was empty. No voices, no movement, only wine pushing dust across the tarmac, the paper targets fluttering faintly on their frames. That night, he barely slept. The following morning, he arrived early, the sky still bruised purple with dawn. His office door was exactly as he had left it, locked, untouched. Inside, nothing appeared missing. No drawers disturbed, no screens accessed. Yet his briefing materials lay arranged on his desk, perfectly, each classified folder aligned edge to edge, corners squared to a degree that exceeded regulation neatness. The spacing between them was uniform, measured with obsessive precision. Even the orientation of the tabs was identical. Stuart stood frozen just inside the doorway, breath shallow, chest refusing to fully expand. A bead of sweat traced a line down his spine despite the air-conditioned chill. He hadn't arranged them that way. He never did. This was not theft. This was not sabotage. It was a message. His fingers curled slowly into a fist at his side as the realization settled into his bones, heavy and undeniable. Someone had accessed his space without resistance. Someone had moved through his routines unseen. Someone had demonstrated control without touching a thing. He was no longer watching her. She was watching him. And in the quiet, fluorescent-lit confines of his office, Lieutenant Stuart understood with sudden, visceral clarity. The hunter he thought he was had become the tracked asset. He was being hunted, and he knew exactly who was doing it. The weekly briefing convened in the base conference room, a space of polished oak and steel-framed chairs, the kind where decisions affecting lads were signed, sealed, and archived for posterity. Higher-ranking officers filled the room, their faces a mixture of expectation and professional detachment. The hum of the air conditioning and the low murmur of personnel adjusting papers formed the backdrop to a high-stakes theater. Stuart stood at the front, posture squared, fingers tapping the remote that controlled the PowerPoint. His presentation, Advanced Urban Warfare Tactics, glimmered on the projector screen behind him, slides lined with diagrams, schematics, and data points designed to impress the brass. He exhaled deliberately, puffed his chest, shoulders pushed back, a calculated display of dominance and technical mastery. This promotion, to lieutenant commander, represented more than rank. It was a lifeline, a financial reprieve from the mounting debts known at him, and an affirmation of the authority he believed he had earned. In the corner of the room, almost invisible, Janet moved with the same silent precision she had mastered over years of clandestine operations. She refilled water glasses with methodical care, wrist flexing subtly to absorb the weight of the pitcher, elbows held slightly bent to maintain optimal leverage. Each pour was precise, minimizing noise, minimizing attention. Her eyes flicked occasionally toward the front of the room, assessing body language, facial micro-expressions, and the micro-movements of Stuart's hands. As you can see, gentlemen, the key to urban entry is speed, Stuart said, voice confident, breath measured, eyes scanning the audience for nods of approval. He clicked the remote. The next slide detailed a fatal funnel principle, annotated with force vectors and schematic entry points. We breach immediately. Instant domination of the entry point ensures control, minimizes casualties. A soft, deliberate voice interrupted. Actually, every head turned. Janet stood by the whiteboard, water pitcher in hand, her posture perfectly neutral, shoulders relaxed but squared. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, a subtle micro-expression betraying absolute focus. The slight tightening of the orbicularis oculi muscle at the corners of her eyes, the faint furrow of her brow calculated engagement with her surroundings. Excuse me, Stuart's voice pitched higher than intended, a flush creeping along his jawline and across the bridge of his nose. His left hand flexed, knuckles whitening around the remote. Did the help just speak? You're referencing the 2018 Standard Operating Procedure, Janet said, tone monotone, neutral, controlled, delivering the correction without deference or excess emotion. That protocol was revised after the incident in Yemen. If you breach that way against modern distinct insurgents, you'll trigger the IEDIS rigged to the door frame pressure plates. You'd lose the entire stack. The room froze. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed suspended. Eyes darted from Stuart to Janet, from the polished slides to the small, unassuming figure holding a water pitcher. The tension was tangible, measured not by volume, but by the microsecond of hesitation in every officer's blink, the fractional pause before inhalation. Captain Miller, a hardened veteran with decades of operational experience etched into the furrows of his face, narrowed his eyes. He scanned Stuart, noting the micro-tick in his jaw, the faint tremor of his right hand, the tight flare of his nostrils, all subtle indicators of acute cognitive dissonance. His gaze shifted to Janet, steady and unflinching, the faint rise and fall of her diaphragm betraying nothing but perfect control. "She's right," Miller said, voice low, grave, carrying the weight of authority. "We updated that doctrine 6 months ago. Lieutenant, why are you presenting outdated tactics?" Stuart's mouth opened and closed, words faltering in the cavity of his throat. I must have pulled the wrong file. This woman doesn't know what she's talking about." The denial was mechanical, too fast, too sharp. His pupils dilated slightly, the corners of his lips pressed together, microsignals of an adrenaline spike, of realization seeping in that he had misjudged the environment and the actor within it. Janet did not respond. She did not flinch. She simply poured the captain's glass with the same meticulous care she had maintained for 3 days, allowed the water to settle precisely at the lip, and stepped back with controlled grace. As she passed Stuart, her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. The almost imperceptible tilt of her lips, a tiny smile, carried the weight of inevitability and acknowledgement that she had asserted authority without force, that she had measured him, and that the scales had shifted. The room remained quiet, the hum of technology, the faint scrape of a chair, the soft exhalations of officers adjusting their posture, the minutiae underscored the psychological recalibration occurring in real time. Stuart's mind raced, scrambling to reconcile the reality of her competence with his entrenched assumptions. Janet exited the room without haste, without fanfare, leaving behind the invisible residue of control she had exerted with nothing more than presence, observation, and a single calibrated correction. Humiliation curdled into resolve as the sun sank behind the Pacific. By the time darkness settled over Coronado, Lieutenant Stuart had made his decision. Whatever Janet had been, whatever she still was, no longer mattered. The damage she had inflicted, public, surgical, irreversible, demanded retaliation. His jaw locked as he walked the corridor toward the SIF, access badge clenched between 2 fingers damp with sweat. The muscles along his neck stood out in sharp relief, tendons rigid beneath the skin. This wasn't strategy, it was spite refined into intent. The SIF door sealed behind him with a muted hydraulic sigh. Inside, the air was cooler, filtered, scrubbed clean of particulates and sound alike. Fluorescent panels cast an even, clinical light over rows of secured terminals. Stuart dropped into the chair at the logistics workstation, rolling his shoulders, once as if loosening tension from a long day, though his breathing remained shallow, uneven. His fingers hovered for a fraction of a second before touching the keyboard. Then they moved fast, aggressive, almost violent. He logged into the logistics server, navigating menus by rote memory. His left eye twitched as he opened the inventory management system, the tick betraying the spike of adrenaline flooding his bloodstream. The plan was simple, elegant, even. He would plant discrepancies, unauthorized transfers. A trail of missing equipment, medical kits, encrypted radios, night vision components all linked back to Janet's contractor credentials. Paperwork would do the rest. Civilian theft inside a military installation was a felony. Careers ended for less. As he typed, his knuckles whitened, the tendons in his hands standing out like cables under strain. He leaned closer to the screen, pupils dilated, attention tunneled so completely inward that he never once looked up. Above him, embedded within the smoke detector housing, a pinprick of light pulsed steady, deliberate. A micro camera no larger than a fingernail recorded everything: keystrokes, screen content, facial micro expressions, the tight pull at the corner of his mouth, the flare of his nostrils, the brief hesitation before he crossed a line he could no longer uncross. 2 buildings away, in a janitor's closet, stripped of mops and solvents and reborn as a covert surveillance node, Janet stood motionless before a tablet mounted at eye level. The cramped space hummed softly with concealed equipment, signal boosters, encrypted relays, redundant power cells. The faint glow of the screen illuminated her face, revealing nothing. Her breathing was slow, diaphragmatic. Her heart rate remained steady. "Got you," she whispered. On her display, Stuart's terminal mirrored in real time. A secondary window tracked his keystrokes at the firmware level, each command parsed, logged, time-stamped. She watched him fabricate inventory losses with increasing speed, the precision of someone who believed control lay in documentation. Then she saw it. A background process initiated without navigating through standard protocols. Stuart's fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second before typing a string of characters that did not belong to any authorized system. Janet's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The muscles in her forearm tightened as her fingers moved across her own keyboard, bypassing layers of encryption with fluid, practiced efficiency. The portal resolved on her screen. The Bazaar, a dark web marketplace known to intelligence agencies as a clearinghouse for stolen state secrets. Her jaw set, not in surprise, but confirmation. Stuart wasn't improvising. This was pattern behavior. She drilled deeper, tracing the transaction path as it executed. Cryptocurrency transferred $50,000 clean, fast, anonymized through multiple tumblers. The timestamp synchronized with a file upload. Janet opened it. Deployment coordinates, SEAL Team 4, Sector Bravo. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to a single, lethal data packet. Janet's chest expanded in a controlled inhale, then stilled. The implications were immediate, absolute. This was no longer harassment. No longer abuse of authority. This was espionage. Active compromise of operational security. Men would die if this reached the wrong hands. On the tablet, Stuart leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply, a fleeting expression of relief crossing his face as if he believed the worst was behind him. Janet's mission parameters updated instantly. Observe gives neutralize, but she didn't move. Not yet. Arresting him now would sever the thread. The beer remained unseen, the handler still in the dark. She needed the full network. She needed Stuart breathing, scared, and convinced he was still in control. Her fingers hovered over the console, then withdrew. She leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving the screen as Stuart logged out, unaware that every step he'd taken had been illuminated, catalogued, and preserved. He thought he was destroying her. Instead, he had just condemned himself. By morning, the base vibrated with controlled urgency. Word of the unscheduled readiness drill moved through Coronado like an electrical current, crackling across corridors and open yards. Boots struck pavement in tighter cadence. Radios chirped with clipped acknowledgments. The kill house, an austere plywood structure scarred by years of simulated violence, stood ready, its corridors dark and waiting. This was not routine training. This was theater designed to test reflexes under stress, to expose weakness. Lieutenant Stuart fed on the attention. He stood near the staging area, helmet tucked under his arm, issuing rapid instructions with forced authority. His voice carried farther than necessary. His gestures were sharp, exaggerated. The faint discoloration beneath his eyes betrayed a night without rest, but the swagger was back, layered over the fatigue like armor. He needed witnesses. He needed control. Then he saw her. Janet moved along the outer perimeter, dragging two overfilled trash bags toward a service bin. Her shoulders slumped forward under the weight. Her steps were uneven, slightly delayed on the left, as if her joints protested each movement. To any observer, she was out of place amid the armed operators, a civilian anomaly skirting the edge of sanctioned violence. "You!" Stuart shouted, his voice cracked through the ambient noise. Janet turned a half-second late, eyes whitening just enough to sell surprise. Stuart closed the distance in 3 aggressive strides and seized her arm. His grip was tight, fingers biting into muscle, pulse visible at his throat. "We're short a role player," he said, breath sharp, words clipped. "You're coming inside." Janet's shoulders tensed subtly beneath the smock. Her free hand curled inward, fingers pressing briefly into her palm before relaxing. "Lieutenant, that's against regulation," she said, voice thin, controlled to the edge of tremor. "I'm a civilian. I don't care." Stuart shoved a ballistic vest into her chest, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. The vest was heavy, level -1 at minimum, designed to absorb fragments and blunt force. "Put this on. You're the hostage." His eyes flicked briefly to the nearby operators, gauging reactions. If you refuse, I'll have you fired for insubordination. Get in the kill house. The threat hung between them, dense and deliberate. Inside his mind, the scenario played cleanly. He would breach hard. He would be decisive. In the chaos smoke, flash, something would go wrong. A shoulder driven too hard into a wall, a flashbang detonated a meter too close. No witnesses would question it. Accidents happened in training. Janet lowered her gaze. Her breathing shortened. She nodded once. He shoved her forward. The interior of the kill house swallowed light. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed by years of boots and concussive blasts. Janet was forced into the central room and pushed into a metal chair. Cold zip ties cinched around her wrists, the plastic biting into skin. The restraint was tight, professionally applied, circulation restricted just enough to be uncomfortable without causing immediate numbness. Stewart stepped back, satisfaction flickering briefly across his face, his lips pressed into a thin line. He turned away without another word. The lights cut. Darkness collapsed inward as operators lowered night vision goggles into place. Green phosphor bloomed across their fields of view. The assault began, boots pounding, door charges simulated, shouted commands ricocheting off plywood walls. In the chair, Janet went still, her breathing slow, deepened. The muscles in her forearms tightened almost imperceptibly. She flexed her hands once, testing resistance. Pain flared white-hot as she rotated both thumbs inward, applying controlled force at the metacarpophalangeal joints. There was a soft, almost inaudible pop. Her jaw clenched, her lips parted on a silent exhale. Sweat beaded at her hairline, but her posture did not change. She rolled her wrists, sliding her hands free of the loosened ties with surgical economy. The plastic fell soundlessly to the concrete floor. She remained seated, waiting. Outside the room, Stewart advanced with his team, weapon raised, heart hammering with anticipation. His breathing quickened behind the mask, fogging the edges of his vision. He imagined her fear, imagined her helplessness. He had no idea the hostage was already free. No idea that inside the darkness, the balance of power had shifted again quietly, irrevocably. The door of the kill house shattered in a concussive roar, a perfectly timed blast that reverberated through the plywood corridors and filled the room with dense, choking smoke. Operators poured in, weapons raised, the sound of boots scraping against the floor, comms crackling with clipped commands. Clear left, clear right, came the shouted orders, crisp, precise, rehearsed but layered with anticipation and adrenaline. Lieutenant Stewart advanced, his silhouette sharp against the haze. His pulse quickened with the thrill of dominance. He envisioned Janet, helpless, a civilian thrust unwillingly into this controlled chaos. His fingers tightened around the grip of his M4, laser pointer aligned with surgical intent between her eyes. A micro-tick at the corner of his jaw betrayed satisfaction, a small flare of smug anticipation. "Dang," he whispered, a predator's murmur masked by the respirator of his night vision gear. Behind him, the team fanned out, each movement premeditated, precise. The chair, however, held nothing. What the words caught in his throat as he spun, scanning the smoke-choked room. His eyes widened imperceptibly, pupils dilated under the green phosphor light. The micro-expression of panic flashed across his face before he forced it down, breath caught momentarily in his chest. From above, a shadow detached from the rafters. It was not a fall, not a stumble. It was deliberate, a fluid, controlled descent. Janet dropped silently, knees bent, absorbing impact through ankles locked in calibrated tension. She landed behind the point man, the first operator, and in one fluid motion secured a sleeper hold. The soldier's arms flailed just long enough to leverage his body weight, dragging him to the ground with precision, his neck pressure controlled, his unconscious slump measured. The glow of the tactical vests blinked in sequence, red light signaling simulated casualty. One by one, the assault team went down, every movement intercepted, neutralized, without a single sound of struggle outside the faint scrape of boots and the whisper of fabric against plywood. Stewart pivoted sharply, scanning the room, the smoke now oppressive in his night vision. His right hand trembled imperceptibly, knuckles whitening as he squeezed the rifle. The illusion of control eroded with each fallen operator. Contact front. He barked, firing blanks into the green-tinged shadows, the recoil mechanical, rage laced with disbelief, a hand emerged from the obscured corner. His barrel was seized with an explosive torque, his M4 wrenched from his grip as if gravity itself had betrayed him. Before he could react, a boot struck the knees, sending him to the concrete with bone-jarring impact. He scrambled back, each movement deliberate, instinctual, hands searching for sidearm, heart hammering with panic he could not disguise. He froze. Janet stood over him, her posture perfect, fluid, balanced. She held no firearm, no weapon of mass, only the stainless steel blade of his own combat knife, extracted from the hidden sheath of his vest without his perception. The tip rested lightly against his carotid artery, pressure measured, deliberate. The micro-expression on her face, a subtle contraction at the corner of her eyes, jaw-locked, communicated control, patience, and lethal precision. "You're dead, Lieutenant," she whispered, voice even, calm, imbued with authority that made every hair on his neck stand on end. "And your form is sloppy." The lights of the kill house snapped on with clinical abruptness. The simulation was over. Dust hung suspended in the fluorescent glare. Operators surveyed their surroundings, rising from rehearsed positions, awareness returning like the tide, but Janet remained at the center of the room, posture exacting, a silent arbiter of what had just occurred. Stewart's chest heaved beneath the tactical gear, rapid inhalation betraying the adrenaline spike. Eyes darted, scanning, calculating, attempting to reconcile the reality before him with the carefully constructed assumptions of control he had carried in. Every movement, every micro-expression, every suppressed exhale was a reminder that the predator had become prey, and that the game he believed he commanded had been meticulously rewritten. The observation deck above the kill house was crowded, the high-ranking officers leaning over the railing with the precision of trained evaluators. Captain Miller's eyes, sharp and unforgiving, scanned the room below, his fingers tapping once on the metal rail. Two admirals flanked him, their presence rigid, exacting, commanding the space with the weight of institutional authority. Every subtle movement, every micro-expression of the personnel below was captured in their assessment eye ticks, clenched jaws, involuntary shifts in stance. Nothing escaped them. In the kill house, Stewart scrambled to his feet, boots scraping against concrete. The respirator mask had been discarded, sweat gleaming across his forehead as he ripped off his helmet. The tremor in his hands betrayed the adrenaline still thrumming through his veins. "She assaulted an officer. Arrest her. She's crazy." His voice cracked, higher in pitch than intended, the accusation raw with desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at Janet, the muscles along his forearm tight, knuckles whitening, his breath shallow and fast. Janet remained stationary, her posture unyielding, every micromuscle in her body controlled. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, processing threats, measuring angles, and assessing exit points. The knife she had wielded moments ago clattered softly to the concrete floor. Her fingers relaxed, and the tip of her boot nudged it away without looking, the movement almost imperceptible. Breathing was perfectly rhythmic, calm, contained. From the overhead loudspeaker, a booming voice cut through the tension like a thunderclap. "Master Chief." Every syllable carried authority, resonance, and the weight of command. It was Admiral Holloway, head of Naval Special Warfare. The words reverberated in the room, shaking Stewart's false sense of control. "Master Chief," Stewart's voice faltered. Confusion rippled across his features. His brow furrowed, pupils dilating, a brief tick at the corner of his eye betraying disbelief. Who are you talking to?" The Admiral descended the stairs with the measured gait of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His gaze was steady, unwavering, assessing. He entered the kill house floor, eyes scanning Stewart briefly, registering the disheveled officer, the tension cold in his shoulders, the rapid intake of breath, before moving past him. His attention fixed solely on Janet. Janet's posture transformed instantaneously. Where she had moved like a civilian minutes before, she now exuded the presence of an elite operator. Her shoulders squared, spine locked in rigid alignment, chin raised, eyes forward. She snapped a crisp salute, every motion exact, deliberate, professional to the microsecond. The Admiral returned the salute, measured, acknowledging. "Report, Master Chief," he commanded, voice low but carrying the weight of unquestioned authority. Janet's response was precise, clipped, and deliberate. "Sir. Target identify. Evidence secured. The leak has been plugged." Her voice carried the calm finality of a battlefield operator, who had completed a mission flawlessly. The faint flare of satisfaction tugged at the corner of her lips, almost invisible to all but the most observant eye. Stuart's mouth hung open. His hands twitched at his sides, fists curling and unclenching, trembling as his gaze darted between Janet and the Admiral. The full scope of events had not yet crystallized in his mind. Panic, disbelief, and shame coursed through him. What is going on? He stammered, the words hollow, a man confronted with forces he could not comprehend. Janet turned her head toward him, her eyes, hard as flint, locked onto his. Every micro-expression tightened jaw, narrowed eyes, subtle flare of nostrils communicated the lethal clarity of someone who had been underestimated at her own peril. "Lieutenant Stuart," she said, her tone precise, juridical in cadence, "you are under arrest for espionage, treason, and conduct unbecoming an officer." The words landed with the weight of finality, leaving no room for argument or evasion. The room seemed to hold its breath, the echo of her declaration reverberating against the plywood walls, punctuated only by the faint hum of ventilation and the officers above observing with clinical detachment. Stuart's chest rose and fell rapidly, eyes darting, mind racing, while Janet remained perfectly composed, the embodiment of disciplined lethality, a figure who had existed under the radar and emerged with absolute authority. Two military police officers stepped cautiously forward, boots clicking against the concrete floor, their hands hovering over their holsters, posture taut but measured. Janet lifted a single hand, a signal of command that carried the weight of authority without raising her voice. The MPS paused mid-step, micro-expressions betraying subtle confusion, the twitch of an eyebrow, the slight flare of nostrils, but they did not move further. Her gaze, steady and unyielding, swept over the room, assessing situational dynamics, ensuring compliance without overt force. Janet took deliberate steps toward Stuart, each footfall controlled, precise, echoing softly against the warehouse walls. Stuart remained frozen, a man rendered immobile by shock and disbelief. His jaw tightened, lips parting and closing in a silent, desperate attempt to formulate a defense, his eyes wide, darting from her face to the blade still resting faintly on the floor. The flush of blood drained from his face, leaving a pallor that clashed starkly with the sweat beading on his upper lip. His chest rose and fell unevenly, shallow gasps punctuating the oppressive silence. "You wanted to see my tattoo." Janet's voice resonated through the warehouse, low but sharp, precise. Each word carried the weight of experience, discipline, and controlled lethality. It echoed in the cavernous space, bouncing off the walls, filling the room with the gravity of revelation. Her eyes locked on Stuart's, unblinking, assessing, reading every flicker of panic and guilt, cataloging his physiological betrayals, the minute twitch of his left eye, the involuntary tightening of his fists. "You wanted to know what it means." With deliberate calm, she rolled her sleeve up again, the fabric gliding past her wrist and forearm, revealing the black and faded peregrine falcon clutching a lightning bolt, the Latin inscription Celeritas et Leadem etched like a silent oath of duty and lethality. Below the talons, the small rayed Roman numeral for pulse symbolically, in the harsh fluorescent light, an emblem of rank, qualification, and clandestine authority. Stuart's pupils contracted and dilated in rapid succession, his lips parting in a silent gasp as comprehension dawned. His body trembled, shoulder blades tensing, hands flexing as though he could physically recoil from the revelation. He had underestimated her, he had misjudged her entirely. "Task Force Falcon isn't just a unit, Stuart," Janet continued, her tone flat, authoritative, and inexorably final. "It's internal affairs for special operations. We hunt the traitors within our own ranks. I've been investigating you for 6 months." The words landed like surgical incisions, precise and devastating, each syllable measured to fracture his remaining composure. Her fingers reached into her pocket and produced a small, crumpled object, the smiley face sticker she had surreptitiously placed on his target days before. She moved with fluid precision, her actions deliberate, almost ceremonial. She pressed the sticker against his chest armor, the adhesive making a soft click that seemed to resonate disproportionately in the silence. Stuart's shoulders slumped slightly, the first outward indication of defeat, a micro-expression of resignation flickering across his face. Janet leaned in, the faint scent of her tactical gear and disciplined presence mingling with the cold warehouse air. Her voice dropped to a whisper, audible only to him, cutting through the haze of his disbelief. "And by the way," she said, each word deliberate, "my coffee was never cold." "You just have no taste." Stuart's facade crumbled. His arrogance, his posturing, his attempts at dominance all dissolved in an instant. As the MPS moved to secure him, their grip firm but not violent, he did not resist. There were no shouted protests, no demands. Instead, his body sagged under the weight of exposure, shoulders curling inward, head dropping slightly, and silent tears traced faint tracks down his flushed cheeks. He wept, to sound low, broken, the culmination of pride stripped away, humiliation rendered complete. Janet stepped back, hands relaxed at her sides, posture taut but composed. Her gaze swept over Stuart one final time, noting the subtle collapse of his psychological armor. The warehouse, still echoing with her declaration, felt charged with the quiet authority of a professional who had executed judgment with precision, leaving no doubt of her competence, her control, and the irreversible consequence of underestimating her. The Pacific Ocean bled gold and amber into the horizon as the sun descended, its final rays glinting off the tarmac in sharp, elongated streaks. The air smelled faintly of salt and engine exhaust, the distant hum of base activity, subdued counterpoint to the heavy silence surrounding the black SUV. Janet stood rigid, a sentinel in civilian attire that spoke of precision and operational readiness rather than conformity. The blue smock of logistics support was gone, replaced with tactical pants, a fitted dark jacket, and wraparound sunglasses that shielded her eyes, concealing the quiet calculation behind them. Every crease in her clothing, every line of her posture, screamed trained lethality. The subtle shift of her weight from one boot to the other was almost imperceptible, yet it carried the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding environments far more lethal than this. Captain Miller approached, stride measured, hands clasped behind his back before extending one toward her. He had seen many operators in his tenure, but Janet's presence was different, controlled, precise, lethal without spectacle. "We owe you, Janet," he said, his voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of gratitude that was professional rather than effusive. "That intel he sold could have killed 50 men." Janet's gloved fingers met his, a firm handshake, the subtle tension in her grip signaling both acknowledgement and restraint. "Just doing the job, sir," she replied, her tone clipped, even, devoid of pride, yet threaded with the quiet satisfaction of a mission executed flawlessly. She released the grip and stepped back, scanning the horizon with peripheral awareness, taking in the patterns of personnel and vehicles, the exit points, the potential blind spots. Her eyes betrayed nothing, but the microtwitch at the corner of her left eyelid suggested acute vigilance, a subtle reflex honed by years of operational necessity. "Where to next?" Miller asked, his voice measured, expecting perhaps a generic reply. "Wherever the trash needs taking out," Janet said, a faint undertone of dry humor brushing her words, though her eyes remained steely. Every syllable was enunciated with precise cadence, as if she were delivering coordinates for a mission rather than casual conversation. Her gaze briefly flicked to the perimeter, assessing the flow of base traffic, noting the subtle changes in shadows, the micro-gestures of personnel automatic behaviors that only a trained observer could catch. She opened the SUV door with a practiced motion, smooth, controlled, and without hesitation. Inside, her gear bag lay in the backseat, strategically positioned for immediate deployment. The bag was compact, modular, and meticulously organized, each compartment dedicated to specific operational tools. She leaned slightly into the vehicle, the dim glow of the setting sun catching the sharp angles of her face, the faint tension along her jawline betraying readiness even in transition. As the vehicle started moving, the SUV's tires whispered across the asphalt. Janet settled into the seat, posture still disciplined, head slightly tilted to the rearview mirror. Her gaze lingered on the base she had just secured, scanning familiar structures, noting potential vulnerabilities with a practiced eye. The fading shadows reflected across her sunglasses, masking the brief flicker of satisfaction that crossed her features. A fresh cup of coffee sat in the center console, steam curling upward in delicate spirals. She reached for it, lifting the cup with a smooth, controlled motion. The warmth met her palm, a fleeting human comfort amidst the stark professionalism of her day. She brought the cup to her lips, the first sip releasing a rare moment of repose. In the mirror, the fading outline of the base blurred, but for the first time in the story, A small, genuine smile softened her otherwise impenetrable expression. It was the subtle exhalation of someone who had balanced chaos, executed with precision, and emerged intact. The vehicle moved toward the gates, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the scene with the quiet finality of a mission completed. Janet's eyes remained forward, focused, every micromovement calibrated. She was ready for whatever came next, wherever the shadows of deception required her intervention. The narrative of the day, the capture, the humiliation, and the triumph all folded into a single, precise moment of controlled satisfaction. Every muscle, every thought, every reflex was under command. Janet was a professional, and the world had yet to fully appreciate the quiet storm she embodied. If you want to follow more stories of elite operators and tactical heroes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.